coming. Thank you all for watching. We're going to find out a little bit about what it was like to grow up in North Reading in the 40s and 50s. Friends of the North Reading Council on Aging present Virginia Slep, who will share exactly what it was like. Her name may sound familiar since she has written a number of articles in the transcript on just that subject. Virginia moved to North Reading with her family to their house on Mount Vernon Street in May of 1948. She attended the Bachelor School through grade school and then went to the new North Reading High School when it opened for grades 10 to 12. She was a college English major, getting a BA and a master's, and then taught high school English for 35 years, retiring in 2009. She teaches a creative writing workshop at Regis College in the Lifelong Learning Program, and she also has a PhD in clinical hypnosis and has a private practice in Wayland. We welcome you. Thanks for coming for us.
Well, in order to give everybody something to look at, I have a copy of the Centennial Celebration booklet from 1953. And I made some copies. I didn't have enough for everybody, I don't think. This is not the entire booklet. Would you like one? But I copied some of the pages that I thought might be fun.
Yep.
So the first page is the date, June 27, 1953. And I remember it very, very well, and the whole town was so excited. You know, it's like it was yesterday, even though clearly I was only 10 years old. But this is the cover. The next page, I don't expect you to read here tonight, but it's the act of incorporation of the town of North Reading in 1853. And it's quite an impressive historical document, I think. So the next one is the Centennial Program on the next page. And I remember this so well. At 10:30 a.m. was the marching parade. It says bands, float, marching units, and the children's section. And clearly they didn't think we were capable of walking very far. Because if you look at it, it says from Washington Street at Elm Street to Park Street to Bow Street to Haverhill Street. Yes, exactly. To L.B. Bachelor School grounds where the whole thing dissolved. And I just think that was kind of funny because with the Bluebirds and the Campfire Girls, we marched every Memorial Day in the parade from the common all the way out to the cemetery and back. So, and we survived. So I'm not sure what they were afraid of on that parade. But then at 11:30 was the motorized parade, and this was a little bit longer from the Bachelor School grounds, Route 62 to Route 28, to North Street, to Haverhill Street, back to the Bachelor School. So that was good. That was the motorized parade. And I also remember, I particularly remember Mr. Putnam, who lives right over here in the Putnam house, driving his red tractor. He had an old tractor that I swear was even older than he was, and Put driving around town in that old red tractor was kind of a fixture in town. Then from 2 to 6 p.m. at the North Reading Town Park, and this is kind of curious, the rear of the L.D. Bachelor School. That means the part by the playground, because the front of the Bachelor School was the part up on, what is it, Edith Street. That little double door, that was the front of the school. Sorry? No, I've got them. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that was the front of the school, and so to march to the rear of the Bachelor School was to basically march to the playground, and I just thought it was kind of funny, because I don't think anybody, even in those days, ever thought of that as the back of the bachelor school. And so all afternoon there were entertainments, the fireman's exhibit of the hand tub and the steamer, modern equipment. I didn't copy some of the pictures of the modern fire engines that they had just bought. They look, modern is not a word I would have used to describe them. And then at 6 p.m., the old-fashioned family supper. I remember that so well. The aim of the Centennial Committee was to feed the whole town at the same time. They didn't want to feed them in shifts. They wanted the entire town to sit down on the playground. Excuse me. I have no idea how they pulled it off, but they had so many tables, all with white paper tablecloths. It was a very simple ham and bean type of meal with probably apple pie and ice cream for dessert or something like that. But I still remember the fun, the novelty at that age of sitting there on the playground with people all around, all over the place, and us having dinner. So the committee accomplished what they wanted to accomplish, feeding the whole town all at the same time. And then the anniversary ball, it was held on the street out here by the Flint Hall. The band set up on the steps heading up toward the Flint Hall, and they played for a long, long time, and it was just one of those things where everybody showed up, you know, grandparents and parents and kids, and everybody got out there and danced, and it was just a lot of fun to see everybody in the town there. And then at 11:59, the bonfire, we all had to walk over to the, do they still have bonfires in town? Every once in a while. I expect they would probably have to spend 2 years getting environmental approval. But they used to do a bonfire every year after the Fireman's Carnival. At the Saturday night, at the very, very end of the carnival, they would spend probably a week or two building this. I can't even imagine how tall it was, maybe 60, 70 feet tall, made of barrels. And they were probably oil. Do you remember?
They do that on the 4th of July, or used to it.
Yes. Yeah, okay. And then they would set it off, and we would stand there and
Salem always had a big bonfire.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I miss those. I do, I miss those. So that was the centennial celebration, and I don't know how the committee managed to pull it off, but they certainly were wonderfully organized, and they did a wonderful job. Now on the next page, as I said, I didn't copy all of the pictures in the catalog, but the next page I thought you might find interesting. In the upper left is the rectory of St. Teresa's Church. And just there on the right is the St. Teresa's Church. When I moved to town in 1948, it's now some kind of a fireplace store out there on Route 28.
Yes.
And I believe the KFC has something down in the basement.
Yep.
Well, that's the way it looked when I moved to town. And the building next to it, which was the priest's home, for a long time it was an Abbott shoe outlet. I don't know what it is now. Can anybody help me with that?
So that's on Main Street as well, or?
It's right beside the church. You can see it right here in the corner of the picture.
Because Abbott's is on Main Street.
It
But
is
they
now,
used to
but
be.
for a while, it was, I went there several times, and it was, you know, a shoe outlet. And I used to think Father Lane would have a heart attack if he knew they were selling shoes. And
They were on Low Street too, when I was living.
yes, yes, right. So this was St. Teresa's Church, and it was very, very tiny. It was apparently mission territory from St. Agnes in Reading. And my poor mother, who had spent her entire life in Philadelphia, was accustomed to churches. Yeah, kind of like you see in Newton and you know, with the big spires and everything. And we moved to North Reading. Mom was not a country girl, bless her heart. And my dad used to tease her that when we actually moved up here, she kept looking off to the side to see if there were Indians with bows and arrows over the street. Poor Mom. So
Why did they locate here?
I'm sorry?
Why did they locate here?
Oh, my dad's job. He had been working in Philadelphia and they transferred him to the Boston office. And we lived in Reading for a year. And then the people who rented us the house decided to come back, so we had to find a house. And my dad just fell in love with the house on Mount Vernon Street and sort of convinced Mom.
Which number is it?
63.
63.
It's the second house in on the left.
Oh, yes, it's big.
Yeah, well, it's long, yeah. Yeah, there's a white house with black shutters on the corner, and this is the second one back that's white with black shutters.
Okay, I think I'm thinking of the wrong house.
It's kind of slightly narrow and very, very long. If you look at it from Haverhill Street, it just seems to go back forever, but
Okay.
it's got the barn attached, and so what you're looking at is the barn, yeah. So, yeah, that was St. Teresa's Church, and it was very tiny and very, very crowded, and they used to cram people in there like sardines. And then we were very, very excited when they broke ground at the current St. Teresa's Church, but it seemed to take forever and ever and ever to get it built, but they finally did. And then the two pictures down at the bottom are the Baptist Church, which is on the other corner of Mount Vernon Street. I never saw the picture on the left. That apparently burned down in 1927 and was replaced with the one on the right with all of the stonework and the brown shingles up the top. And that was what I grew up living near and using as a landmark, you know, go on Cable Street and turn at the brown and the stone church. So I thought it was kind of interesting because neither of these churches is the same today. So I thought I would share those pictures with you. Now if you turn to the next page, to be fair, I included a picture of the Congregational Church, although it hasn't changed a bit. It was beautiful when I was growing up here, and it's still beautiful, and it was pretty much the same. So the picture on the left is, let's see, yeah, 1880, and the one on the lower right is the way it looked in 1953, and it's still as beautiful and as classic as it was back then. Now the one that will probably shock you the most, and I made sure I included it, is the one on the upper right on the page, because that's Kitty's. And Kitty's, back in those days, oh my goodness, it was a speakeasy, all during Prohibition. Apparently, everybody from Boston to God knows where knew about Kitty's. Apparently, you could get some pretty good stuff at Kitty's. Plus, they apparently had strippers and topless dancers in North Reading. Yes, yes. Kitty's had just quite a reputation, and nobody who was the least bit respectable in those days would ever have anything to do with Kitty's. So it's been fun over the years to watch it grow and develop and expand and turn into a restaurant that a lot of people around still know. And one of the mailmen in my town comes up to North Reading for his, I don't know, his eye doctor or something. And he was telling me where he is. He said, it's right around the corner from a really nice Italian restaurant called Kitty's. And I said, "You want to hear about Kitty's? I'll tell you about Kitty's." So I expect maybe some of you have some memories of Kitty's too. Anybody have any memories of Kitty's back in those days? Yes.
I was in Rotary with Seaford Croswell, the funeral home director. And when I told him where I lived, he says, "Oh, I remember, I know your home very well." Kitty's, who owned, Kitty's was named after, Miss Kitty. She was waked out of the home. It was owned by then her best girlfriend. And at the time, Miss Kitty was living in sin with a boyfriend on Central Street. And at that time, they all had wakes in their home primarily. They didn't go to the funeral home to have the wake. And so she couldn't have it at his house. So she volunteered, and he was probably a fairly young guy at the time, and he says, "Oh my gosh, I remember I walk in your front door and you left the living room with the fireplace, and she was laid out right there, and it was all very respectable." But Miss Kitty was waked out of my home, and whenever it was, way back.
Oh, the stories we could tell.
Oh boy.
You know, Maureen Doherty, the editor of the transcript, and I joke that between the two of us, we've got North Reading covered from 1948 to the present. And between the two of us, we know some pretty good stories that, believe me, are never going to make it into the transcript. And the two of us joke that one of these days, we're going to put out a tell-all book. People say I should put out a book of all the columns I've written. Now, people have already read those. We're going to put out a book about the other stories that don't make it into the transcript. Thank you. So, and there's a picture of the Croswell Funeral Home. I just thought I would put that in there because
It hasn't changed much.
it hasn't changed much, has it? Still looks pretty much the same. Now, on the upper left, those telephone operators. Do you remember those kind of switchboards? That was on one of the houses between where the fire station is and where the hornet's nest is now. There's a little row of maybe 4 houses that sit side by side. And I can't remember just which house it's in, but you would pay your telephone bill by going to the front door and opening the door, and this is what you would see when you went in. That's where the switchboard was. And you could pay your telephone bill there. And then the rest of, beyond this little tiny room, which was basically like the front porch, was the house. I can't think of the people's name, which is too bad. But what we used to have back until 1952, I believe, was those old phones. Ours was a wooden box, and it sat on the wall in the dining room, and to make a call, you would pick up the receiver and turn the crank a couple of times, and it would ring here into the telephone operator's ear, and she would come on and say, "Number please," and you would give her the number that you wanted. My best friend, Ginny Eaton's number was 435. So, I would say 435, and she'd connect me to Ginny, and I would talk to Ginny, and then when you were through, you would hang up and turn the crank again to let the operator know to pull the plug. So one day, I'm confessing my sins now, one day I decided that it was so much fun to ring the bell, that when I was finished talking, I would just crank and crank and crank. So I did. I rang it for quite a long time. It was kind of fun. And then a few minutes later, I decided to call another friend, so I picked it up and gave her the number, and boy, did I get a lecture. That was very, very rude, and if you ever do that again, I'm going to tell your mother. And of course, she knew my mother, so, yeah, everybody knew everybody, so you couldn't even get away with anything on the telephone in those days without.
Was that also a party line too, like they had afterwards?
Yes, yes. A lot of people had a party line, and we had a party line, but I don't ever recall rings coming through on the other one, so I'm not sure exactly what the story was.
But you could hear other people talking.
You
pick up the phone and wanted to make a call,
Yeah.
and you could hear people talking, you know,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
Right.
someone else is on the line.
Right, that hardly ever happened with us, so I don't know if maybe it was just a person who worked all day and was only there. I really don't remember, because I was a kid back then, but yeah, as you said, you would hear somebody else talking, and you would just hang up and wait for them to get off, and there were different rings. Our house was a double ring, their house was a single ring, so when you gave the number that you wanted, like, 3, 4, 7, you had to specify ring 1 or ring 2. And in our house, if it rang 1, we knew that it was for the other people, and we didn't pick up, so. And if it rang twice, it was for us, and it was, we would answer it. And I remember so well when the rotary phones came in, North Reading was really moving into the modern age. I mean, a rotary dial, for heaven's sakes, and you didn't need the operator anymore, and the dial tone, and, we were all just so excited, This was modern living, let me tell you. And we had to dial 5 numbers now instead of just 3 until I know.
Quite a change from now.
Yes.
You just have one cell phone.
Right, right. And the other thing was, do you remember those telephone tables
Yes.
that had the little chair built in, so that you could actually sit there, because you had to have the telephone attached to the wall. So you often didn't have any chairs anywhere around, so to have a telephone table, with a little table that you could put the telephone on or under, and be able to sit right there. I mean, talk about modern convenience. I think that was close to indoor plumbing. Now, if you look at the next page, we've got lots and lots of buildings here. I don't know all of them, but I'm going to skip around a little bit. The third row down the middle page, that's now the Hornet's Nest. Yes, it does. Now, when I moved here, the part with the peaked roof, that was Jones Brothers Grocery Store. And I think if you were to get out a magnifying glass and look at the sign, you could see that it was spelled backwards, the letters were backwards. Do you remember it?
I do, yeah.
Nobody remembered why they ever did it that way in the first place, but it said Jones Brothers, and it was the closest thing we had in town to a grocery store. I mean, you could buy food at Ryer's, cans of peas and cake mixes and a bottle of milk and things like that, but if you wanted something more, if you wanted meat or bologna or, anything other than milk or bread, you had to go to Jones Brothers or go down to Reading to the Stop and Shop or to Wakefield to the A&P. That was it. You didn't have any other choices here in North Reading. And the Joneses lived on the corner of Mount Vernon and Haverhill Street. There's that little white house there now. Excuse me. This white house with black shutters, and the lawn is nicely cared for now. Back in those days, I'm going to try to be as tactful as I can. Tact is not my strong suit, but I'm going to try to be very tactful. The house on the corner back then was yellow with red trim. It was hard to miss. So it was also very good for giving directions, because when people came up, from Reading or from Wakefield, they had the big brown church with all the stonework, and they had the yellow house with red trim. And the little picket fence was also yellow with red trim. And in the whole area in the back, they kept horses. They started off with one horse, and then they got another one, and she had a little filly that came with her, and she was pregnant, so she had a colt. So they had 4 horses in that little backyard area, And the manure pile grew and grew and grew, and so did my dad's tomatoes and corn, because he would just take his wheelbarrow over. Mr. Jones said, "Come and help yourself." So Dad had an unlimited supply of horse manure to fertilize all of his green beans and his pumpkins and everything. So that part was really good. And then one day, one Easter, they gave Jackie, their daughter, a little lamb. Oh, this little lamb's cute. He was little and white and fuzzy, and they named him Sam. And Sam grew, and he grew, and he grew, and he grew. By the time he was grown, I think he was probably about this big. And he had some little horns, and they would shear him once a year, but up until the shearing, he just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And he would roll around in all of the straw in the yard, so he always looked quite fearsome because he had all this fur and all this hay clinging to him. And the problem was he looked so fearsome, but he just wanted somebody to scratch his ears. So you'd go walking down the street, and Sam would come running up to you, this big thing, and headbutt you until you turned around and scratched his ears.
Like a dog.
Yes, yes, except that he had horns and he would come up behind you and headbutt you. And most of the school kids who lived further up Mount Vernon Street were terrified of Sam because they thought he was going to hurt them. The problem was they didn't really keep Sam confined very well. So on Sunday morning, it seemed like all of the members of the Baptist church would gather up at the parsonage, and then they would walk down the hill to the church. And there would Sam be waiting to greet them all. They'd all be dressed up, you know, very sedately, carrying their Bibles, and here'd be this huge ram with all of his hay clinging to him, running up, waiting for somebody to rub his ears. And the very last person to leave the church after services on Sunday would be the minister. And after, you know, an hour or so after it closed up the church, he would walk back up Mount Vernon Street wearing his good suit, and Sam would come along behind him, headbutting him. It's very difficult to look dignified and ministerial when you're afraid that your good trousers are going to be torn by this ram who wants to come up and headbutt you because you're not rubbing his ears. So,
Was the parsonage for the Baptist church that next house that's there now?
no, it's the one, you know where Parsonage Lane is now?
Yes.
It's the big house just beyond Parsonage Lane,
Just beyond,
you know,
okay.
the two-story house right beyond, which is why they called it Parsonage Lane, right? So that was the Mr. Jones who owned Jones Brothers grocery store. So that was, I digressed, but I love to tell the story about Sam.
It's interesting.
And the little part beside it, on the left there, that was the Rexall drugstore. They weren't called pharmacies then. That was the Rexall drugstore. And the last part,
You're talking about next to the Jones?
Yes,
Okay,
right here.
Okay, yeah.
that was the Rexall drugstore, and they had a soda fountain, and you could get ice cream cones for a nickel.
Is that Nan's now?
Sorry?
Is that Nan's now, the little restaurant on the corner up here on Park? That looks
No,
like,
no.
Where was this located?
This is the Hornet's Nest,
Oh,
The one, the drugstore?
the drugstore, yes, it's
Oh, that's-
attached to Jones Brothers.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Grocery store.
All
That
right.
little window there beside Jones Brothers was the drugstore. And the other window that you could just barely see off to the left there, that was the post office.
oh.
And the post office was smaller than this enclosure. I mean, there was just nothing to it. A few mailboxes, you know, for private mailboxes, and one little window, and that was it. So this part was the extent of our shopping center back in those days. And I remember, I was probably maybe 9 or 10 when they added on, the other Jones brother added this part on right here, and that became the Jones Brothers hardware store. So, I mean, talk about modern. We now had a hardware store in town, and you didn't have to always go to Wakefield to get your hardware, so that was really, really progress. The Nan's restaurant that you're talking about is the McGoldrick's drugstore.
Whatever that was, drugstore at one time.
That was open, for some reason, in competition with the Rexall drugstore. And it was run by Mr. and Mrs. McGoldrick. And they were very, very nice. It was a lovely drugstore. The thing about it that I will never forget is that they had this program whereby any kid in North Reading at the bachelor school who made the honor roll could get a free ice cream cone.
Wow.
Wow is right. Wow is right. That inspired more than a few kids to do that little bit of extra credit, because we didn't have ice cream cones all the time, and so I don't know how much ice cream they went through, but yeah, I've never forgotten that. And then on the right, the far right, on that same line is Ryer's store, and I've talked about that one before. Molly Ryer was, I think, probably about 200 years old when I was growing up. And she always wore this house dress covered with one of those aprons that, you know, you put your arms in the sleeves and the ties in the back. And she was very, very quiet. So it wasn't until Bill, her nephew, I believe, started working there a lot that people started stopping in to chat, because Bill, bless his heart, would chat with just about anybody, but Molly was very, very quiet. She raised chickens out in the back behind the store, and our dog Tippy used to break into the enclosure and try to kill her chickens. She wasn't too happy about that. She had a baseball bat and she used to hit Tippy over the head. And he'd come home with all these lumps. But we figured it all evened out because Betty Johnson, who was the woman who ran the cafeteria, she lived up on Flint Street, and her big Newfoundland used to break into our chicken coop and try to kill our chickens. So we figured it all evened out. What can I say? So just above that is the new North Reading post office. I remember when that opened. I mean, really, you look at the size of it, that was gigantic. That was about 3 times the size of the post office that had been attached to Jones Brothers.
Where is it? Where was it?
Down on Bow Street.
Okay.
Which one is it?
This
It's
one.
the second one? Yes,
One.
okay.
It was connected to the laundromat, which is on the bottom right here. It was just
That
a
must be
long.
along where the transcript
Yes,
was. for-
yes, exactly.
Okay.
What's there now?
Tai Chi, massage, healing,
Okay.
wellness center.
Okay, okay. Well, it used to be the laundromat, excuse me, and the post office, and there was an eye doctor. I mean, he wasn't an actual doctor, what are they, an optician or something, who had his office down there too. Thank you for coming, bye-bye. Yeah, so to have that little strip down there, a laundromat in North Reading, wow, wow. You know, I think probably at that point, my mother was still using her wringer washer. And so even she would go there if there were really big things like quilts or bedspreads or something that her little wringer washer just couldn't handle. She'd at least go there and wash them and then bring them home and hang them on the clothesline out behind the barn. Hope that Sam wasn't loose that day. And the Sunoco station, okay, DNS service station, that was right across from Jones Brothers, where there's a brick building now. I don't know what it is now, but
Oh, yeah.
Clark Sawyer had some kind of, whatever he did, some sort of engineering or architect. I don't remember what Mr. Sawyer did.
Made
but-
office positions.
Okay. He, I believe, built the brick building after this little gas station was gone, but the whole time that I was growing up, that's what it was, and up above it is the McIntyre bus line, which is the bus line, I don't know where it started, but if you stood right down at the corner across the street from Briar's, the corner of the playground there, the bus would come along Park Street and pick you up and take you to Reading Square, which was just amazing, absolutely amazing. You could do your shopping on an afternoon and then take the bus home and get home before the kids got home from school. The thing was, I don't think there were probably 10 women in town who had a car of their own. You know, all the men took the cars, parked them at, I don't know, Reading Station or wherever they went to work. And so the car didn't be available until 5:30 or 6 at night. And so to have a bus that could actually get you down to, because back in those days in North Reading, we didn't have any dentists either. We had to go to Reading Center to get the dentist. So that McIntyre bus lines was, I mean, between McIntyre bus lines and the dial tone and a laundromat, what more could we ask in North Reading? You know, we were just really, really moving up. And then the other one I wanted to talk about is the second one down on the right, the Abbott Shoe Company. You know where that used to be? Across the street from Nan's.
Where there's a service station now, a gas station.
No,
Oh,
not
in the little
that.
shopping
In the little
center,
shopping center, yeah,
where they ended up having a store.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
don't, but we moved here in '68 and that building is totally unfamiliar.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, because we moved in '68, I don't remember that at all.
I think it burnt in the late 50s, I think.
What was that?
It burnt down, I think, in the 55, 6 or 7, somewhere in there.
Okay, thank
But
Was
you.
it what-
they were there, weren't they? I mean, we were
Yeah,
in that same location.
yes, but not in that building.
When I opened my business in town, almost everyone that applied for work had worked at Abbott Shoe, and I thought, where the heck is that?
What kind of shoes did they make?
Everything. They had, and you could go in there, he'd have a pile of shoes that would fill this room, and they weren't tied together. So you'd find a shoe you like, and he'd look at it and say, oh, all right, and they'd go digging through there,
Yeah.
and they'd come up with the right one.
Yes,
I remember
and it'd be the right size.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, yes.
But
I was never in there, but when I was approaching high school age, a surprising number of kids who were older than I was dropped out of high school, maybe the 10th
Yeah.
or 11th grade, and went to work at Abbott Shoe.
Sure.
Because, you know, they were only gonna go to work anyway after high school, and there was Abbott Shoe, and it was hiring people, and so they went there, and I never did know what happened to them. The thing I remember most about it is that the doors were always open. Summer they were open, winter they were open, and the heat was just pouring out of there. They didn't need to have the doors closed to keep the place warm. And anybody that you would see who had been working in there, even in the middle of the winter, they would be wearing like sleeveless blouses. So it must have been raging hot in there.
That's something I didn't know.
The other thing that always amazes me, I guess they say what you don't know won't hurt you. Abbott's was right on the Ipswich River. And one of the best places in town to swim was the swimming hole down behind Abbott's. So Dad would park his car in the Abbott Shoe parking lot on a Saturday or Sunday, and we'd walk down this little path beside the river to behind it. I mean, it was down there a bit. And it was called Tracy's. Do you remember Tracy's?
No.
I never did figure out who Tracy was, but it was called Tracy's, and we would swim there in the Ipswich River for a good long time, and it was wonderful. The water was cool and refreshing, and there were only a few bloodsuckers. Yeah. And they didn't hurt, you know, if you came out all covered with silt with a bloodsucker attached to it, right? You just pull it off and throw it back. What the heck, you know, what's a bloodsucker among the friends? And now I look at it and think, I would love to know what chemicals Abbott shoe was dumping.
That's what I was gonna ask you.
At least they went to Cannery.
Yes, yes, a number of people have pointed that out to me. But even so, can you imagine the stuff that was dumped into the Ipswich River right there? And we swam and swam.
You look healthy.
You're still here.
Yeah. If you've been reading the columns I've been writing in the transcript lately, it's about how did we ever survive
Oh, sure.
childhood.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I should mention that one. Yeah, the other place that was even better to swim was also in the Ipswich River. You see, if you go down to the cemetery, you know where the entrance is to the cemetery, right across from that, right across the street from the entrance, between that and the first house on the right, there used to be a little driveway and a wooden bridge that crossed the river. And Dad would park along the street and we'd walk along the little wooden bridge, probably wasn't from here to there, and go down the far bank. And I don't know if it ever had a name, it was just called the swimming hole. That was just the best place, just the best place.
That was the Smith property. The Smiths just sold that not too many years ago to the town. I think the bridge is still there. I don't think anyone would use it. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Gloria is nodding her head, so I assume that's right.
The bridge is still there?
Yeah,
I'm
when
gonna
the
have
river
to-
is low, you
Yeah.
can go across.
She used to go sparking out there one time, I remember.
Yeah, no.
I'm gonna have to go down there someday and check it out. I'd love to. I used to wonder why Mom and Dad would sit on the bank and never go in. Well, for Mom, it was the bloodsuckers. That was a big deterrent for her. They don't have bloodsuckers in Philadelphia, evidently.
Just the
But even
politicians.
Dad would just sit on the bank, and I used to wonder why. And looking back, it's because it was so shallow. Probably wasn't worth it for them to, get their feet all full of mud and go in. But those were the two best places to swim. And I can never drive by there without thinking, I wonder what in the world. Well, the other thing, I'm not looking at the clock because I want to be finished, but I have only a certain amount of time allotted to me. The other thing that I wonder about is Railroad Avenue and all those new condos that they built in there. Forever and ever and ever, that was the Monroe Fuel Company. And they had oil tanks that I swear were the size of this room. And the big tankers would come and pump the oil into their tanks. I mean, this was in our backyard, so I know they were there. We could go down the backyard and see the back of these tanks, and they would pump all of this oil in there. And then the oil trucks, one by one, as the month or so wore on, would come and offload gallons and gallons of heating oil into their trucks. And I just think, that didn't all go into the trucks. You know, some of it had to spill. That soil has to be oily. It just has to be, and I just can't imagine. I'm not aware of them having gone through any, what do you call it, detoxification or anything like that before they built those. Yeah, and so I don't know how on earth they ever got permission to build all those condos. The only thing I can think of is that perhaps enough time elapsed so that nobody on any of the committees knew that Monroe Fuel used to be there. But
Well, they do now.
they do now, yes, yes. That's one of the stories that Maureen Doherty and I are planning to talk about. Maureen and I have some some views, believe me. So those are the things that I had wanted to talk about. Now, tell me your stories. We have a few minutes left. What are some other stories about North Reading back in those days that you experienced?
Well, we had Mr. Upton from Upton Farms. The first picture on the second row. Upton Lumber was up on Upton Ave,
Okay.
where Gordon Hall now lives. All that land belonged to the Upton, and there was a sawmill. And one of the descendants, Donald Upton, came to North Reading and spoke for the Historical Society about, you know, the family history of the trees, because we had plenty of trees in North Reading. And he is still living, communicates every so often, but I do send him the Reading Light calendar so that he can maintain, you know, some of the historical
nice.
pictures that are in the calendar.
That's nice.
And I came to North Reading in 1959, and Abbott Shoe was still up, because I
Yeah.
remember that
Yeah.
building, so it was shortly after,
Yeah.
perhaps, that the fire took place.
One other thing, well, two other things I forgot to mention. The top middle picture of Hammond's television service. That was back in the days when you had to have a TV repairman come to your house with his big box of tubes, and he would try replacing this tube and that tube, and that was a good way to make a living, because if one of your tubes burned out, you were stuck until Rexall Drugstore put in this thing so that you could take the tubes out of the back of your television, bring them to the drugstore, poke them around and see which one, you know, was defective, and buy the replacement tubes right there. The only problem was going home and remembering which tube you had taken out, which little plug, and that was a bit of a challenge. The other one is the middle one on the very bottom of the Eisenhower tomato farm. You know where the Eisenhower Farms development is
Is that
now?
up off of Haverhill?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that used to be an enormous tomato farm. The Eisenhowers used to provide tomatoes to all of the supermarkets and grocery stores and restaurants in Boston. And I mean, they had, I don't know, something like 14 greenhouses. I mean, it was huge. And there were a lot of Eisenhower brothers, at least 4 of them, minimum 4. And these tomato greenhouses supported all 4 families and their children. Plus the Eisenhowers didn't have to spend every single minute in the greenhouses, so they ran the school buses too. So I think maybe there were 5 Eisenhower brothers, and there were 5 Eisenhower buses, and they would have to park along Haverhill Street in the proper order so the kids knew which Eisenhower bus to get on. But I had never seen that picture before until I looked at it just recently, but that's some of the Eisenhower tomatoes. Does anybody else have any stories to
Just one
share?
question, Richardson, is that the garage there on 62?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. It probably is.
What's the name of the one right down from your street, or not, on Haverhill, but between between Mount Vernon and 62, there's a little, repair shop set back.
Bob Greenberg.
That's it. But what's the name of it? It's not called Richardson's then?
Oh, no.
The auto bodies.
Okay.
The other thing, and I neglected to bring that picture, you know where McGee Donnelly's plumbing is now, right there on Haverhill Street, kind of across from Railroad Avenue. McGee Donnelly's plumbing used to be at the North Reading train station.
Yeah,
Yes, we had a train that, I'll have to come back again and tell those stories. But yeah, the train ran from, I don't know where, I think maybe from Linfield on through, and I don't know where it went. It wasn't still there when we moved here in 1948, but I have pictures. That's where it got the name Railroad Avenue. because when we moved here, the train tracks weren't in Haverhill Street, but they were all the way down Railroad Avenue, and they ran past the Eaton Inn all the way out to Central Street and beyond. And it was, we used to go for Sunday afternoon walks down on the railroad tracks, and they were still there, yeah. So, I mean, North Reading was really moving into the modern age.
There must be a trolley at 28 too.
Yeah, yeah, and apparently trolley tracks too, yeah, those were the days.
What's your memory of the Wheeler Farm?
I don't have any memory of the Wheeler Farm at all. The funny thing about North Reading in those days was that, you know, after school, you went home and you played with the kids in your neighborhood because you had no way of getting anyplace else. So in school, I knew kids who lived all over town, but I could never play with them because my mom didn't have a car to go and get me. So there were so many places in North Reading that I just really grew up not knowing anything about because I had no way of getting there. Yes.
The third picture on the first column, Ryan's Brothers, the Texaco station, was that Temple Oil?
I don't know that either.
Excuse me?
I don't know.
Well, it does look like Temple Oil. However, to bring you up to date further, that was, that is now a Hafner station.
Uh-huh.
And the Hafners have a big history in the Lawrence Methuen area.
Ah,
And Mrs. Hafner, or, excuse me, the Hafner daughter of the Mr. Hafner who owned the stations, was educated at the Sorbonne University in Paris.
wow.
And however, when she came home from school, the men were in the service and she had to pump the gas. And she worked very hard.
Uh-huh.
And she married a Frenchman, Mr. Fournier, and they had 4 sons, no daughters. And they were all tall people. She equally was tall. But anyway, there's a lot of history to the Fournier. They were very Christian, very charitable to the people in Lawrence. They used to provide, there was a spring in their initial gas station, a natural water spring, and people could go there and fill their gallons of water until the government moved in and said, oh no, that's not, you know, you have to pay $100,000 to get these pipes and, you know, you're gonna get germs. So they said, no, it's not. No, we're not gonna do that, because they were thrifty, you know, they knew how to spend their money wisely.
Yes.
So anyway, that's just the latest news that Chucky now is a Hafner owner. Hafner, it's got kick. It's very good gas.
Did you get
Thank
paid
you.
for that?
Thank you.
I heard that the Jones brothers, I don't know if it's true, but a rumor was that he lost a bet and he had to put the name up there backwards. Now, the building I was in, it was called Roberts
Yes.
for the longest time, and then it became Strubba.
Strubba,
And
right.
Strubba is Roberts backwards.
Right.
Just like many of us don't remember, but Wally Seagap. Do you remember Wally Seagap? That was Yellow Pages backwards. So I think there was something going on in those days that we did things backwards for some reason or other, if we lost a bet.
That's fascinating. I lived right next door to them for all those years, and I never heard that story.
Oh,
That's a neat story.
The Robertses?
No, the Joneses.
Oh, okay, right, yeah. Yeah, we sold them in the 50s, we sold them in the hardware store, we sold them model, that's what I was in the model airplane business, we used to sell them. He was one of our accounts back in the 50s. It's funny to, yeah, quite a town. I live next door, but I still like North Reading.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
been very good to me.
it was great. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, we look forward to reading your articles all the time. I look forward.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Virginia. Wonderful as always.
Oh, yes.
Thank you all for coming. We have some snacks. If you want to stay, we have a little board meeting going on after this Fred's meeting. You're welcome to stay. So thank you for coming, thank you so much again, it's just so wonderful to hear the stories, and of course, it's also wonderful to hear Gloria all the time. So thank you, and thank you to NORCAM, and thank you to Dave Doucette for filming this program. Thank you.
And before anyone escapes, we are always looking for new members of Friends of the Council on Aging. It's a very minimal membership fee, and the money goes to support a lot of the special little things that Mary does for our seniors here in town.
Lovely.